Hey guys, it's Mary and welcome back to Study Journey. Welcome back to the Python series. This is episode 7 of the Hangman series and we're going to be talking about user input requirements. So in the last episode we talked about user-computer interactions and now we're going to be talking about what we should do if the user inputs something that is not in the alphabet. So without further ado, let's get on with the video. So in our last episode, we talked about the game architecture and also user-computer interaction. In this episode, we're going to be talking about user input requirements. So I'm going to open my folder of CS Practice and go to my Hangman Files folder where I have saved everything from the downloads. I'm going to open the instructions, and as we can see, we have finished the first two parts of the part 2 of the problem 3. So now when we scroll down to the user input requirements, it says that you may assume that the user will only guess one character at a time, but the user can choose any number, symbol, or letter. Your code should accept capital and lowercase letters as valid guesses. So in the beginning, we have always assumed that what the user guesses is a letter. However, the user can obviously guess anything, but we're only going to accept letters, so whether it is capital or lowercase. So if the user inputs anything besides an alphabet, for example, a hashtag, tell the user that they can only input an alphabet. Because the user might do this by accident, you should get 3 warnings at the beginning of the game. And each time they enter an invalid input or a letter they have already guessed, they should lose a warning. If the user has no warnings left and enters an invalid input, they should lose a guess. So I'm going to open my Hangman episodes, which is where I have saved everything from the previous episodes, and we're going to build onto this. Now, if we scroll down, we can see that this is our Hangman function right here, and right now we just have the number of guesses. So it says that you should have 3 warnings. So before this, I'm going to add remaining warnings and let it equal 3. So we have 3 remaining warnings left. And now we can run this, and as we can see, it doesn't print out anything yet, so we have to tell the user how many warnings they have left. And we can go down and read some more, so we can see that the first hint is you have to get the user's guess and check that the user input is an alphabet. If it is not uppercase or lowercase alphabet letter, then subtract warning or 1 guess. And in hint 2, it says that you might find the string is alpha and also string lower helpful. If you don't know what these are, you can try typing these in your spider shell to see the documentation for the functions. So this spider shell is basically like our terminal, so whether you use spider shell or terminal, it should be the same. Now first I'm going to clear out everything I have on my screen, because I'm going to type in Python 3 and then we can use the help and everything else. So I'm going to type in string dot is alpha with my string. So I'm just going to let my string be ABC123, and then let's see what it says. Oh, it returns false. So let's try something else. So let's try if it was all alphabet. So I'm just going to say ABC and see what it says. It says true. Okay, so basically this function is determining whether or not this string is an alphabet, and then we can kind of tell by the name of the function. So let's try string.lower. So str.lower, and then in my string I'm going to say ABC, and it says ABC. Okay, so it types out the string. So let's try if it was uppercase ABC. It's still going to give you ABC because it is going to give you the lowercase of whatever the string is. So this is what we're going to be using. If the user gives us an uppercase letter, we're going to convert it to a lowercase letter before we do anything else. Okay, so now that we know what these two mean, we can go over and try to write our function and see when we need to use it. So if we go over to the example of game implementation, this is what our final code should look like. So it gives you the warnings left, the guesses left, the available letters, and then guess a letter. If it is not in it, we go over and then we have the data, so which we printed out right here, and then it just prints out how many guesses you have left. So our warnings, we are only going to print once in the beginning, and after that we're only going to update the guesses and warnings if we use it. So we're going to have to print out how many warnings they have left before the while loop, because each time they redo it, we're not going to print out how many warnings they have left unless it is an invalid letter or if it has already been guessed. So before the while loop, we're going to print out we're going to print out you have, and then you're going to add the string of remaining warnings. So now that we have this, it should print out how many warnings you have left, which right here, you have 3 warnings left, until it updates it. So it will update it in this loop if the user guesses something that is not an alphabet or it has already been guessed. So in this episode, we're just going to write if it is not an alphabet. So where are we going to write if it is not an alphabet? Well, as we can see, they're going to guess a letter. So before we update this letter, we have to determine whether or not it is an actual letter. So after they input the guess, if it is not a letter, we're going to have this warning. If not, everything else is going to be the same. So right here, if it is not a letter, so I'm just going to say if not string dot is alpha. So this string is alpha, it tells you if it is a letter or not. So if it is not a letter, we're going to do whatever we have underneath here. If else, we do everything else. So colon indent, if this, then this. And then underneath it, we can say else and then indent everything underneath it. Now that we have this, we just have to write whatever we had to do if it is not an alphabet. So up here, I'm actually going to write and define a new function. So I'm going to define what we will do if it is not alphabet. So I'm going to name it not alpha warning. So if it is not an alphabet, what are we going to do? The parameters, and then we colon and then indent. So what are the parameters? So remember, parameters are what you're going to be using inside of this function. So if it is not an alphabet, we have to update the remaining warnings and remaining guesses. So we're going to be using the remaining warnings, remaining guesses, because if we have no warnings left, we are going to start updating the remaining guesses. If we implement this function and it is not alphabet, then we're going to update our remaining warnings. So our remaining warnings is going to be our previous remaining warnings, which it started off with 3, but it will go less each time when we run this function. And then after this, we're going to have to print out, oops, that is not a valid letter, and then how many warnings they have left. So this is where we're going to be updating the remaining warnings instead of when we are updating the remaining guesses each time. We're only going to update it if this runs. So after this, we're going to print, oops, that is not a valid letter. And then you have how many warnings left. Well, as we can see, as we did before, we add the string of remaining warnings because we updated it beforehand. And then you add warnings left. And then after this, we have a colon and then the word that they have, or the get guess word. So colon, close, quotes, comma, and then the get guess word. And remember, in the get guess word, our 2 parameters were the secret word and then the letters guessed. So we're going to add that in as our parameters right here. So as we can see, we use these 2 parameters, and because we use these 2 parameters in this function, we have to add it as inputs. So in the input section, we have to copy over our 2 parameters that we used right here. So the secret word and then the letters guessed. Okay, so this is what will happen if we have remaining warnings. However, what do we do if there are no remaining warnings left? Well, it says right here that if there are no remaining warnings left, we're going to start taking from their guesses. So if the user has no warnings left and enters an invalid input, they should lose a guess. So, and before this, if there are no remaining warnings left, or if remaining warnings is equal to 0, okay, so in Python, there is the 1 equal sign and then the 2 equal signs. 1 equal sign means you are assigning a value to something. And then 2 equal signs is determining whether or not the 2 sides are true. So if the remaining warnings is equal to 0, if these 2 are the same, then we're going to subtract from the remaining guesses. So the remaining guesses is going to be the previous remaining guesses number minus 1. And then we're going to also print what we have down here. how many warnings they have left. So now if this happens, we're going to implement this. Otherwise, we're going to be implementing what we wrote before. So after this, we have to return what we want to update. So we're trying to update the remaining warnings or the remaining guesses. It depends on which one we have. So we're going to return the remaining warnings and the remaining guesses. And then now we can use this function in our body function. So if we go down to Hangman, we can see that right here we're going to be using this code. So if it is not an alphabet, then we're going to use the not alpha warning. However, we have to update the variables that we're trying to update so to use it in the future. Because this function returns the remaining warnings and remaining guesses, and before it, we have to update it by letting it equal the remaining warnings and the remaining guesses in these quotations, and then let it equal what they return right here. So now that we have updated it to this, we can now use it in the future. And because we didn't update the letters guess, it is because else right here it is going to update it, and then we can also use it right here. So now let's Command S and let's try to run this. So I'm going to clear my screen. Hangman Episodes is in the folder of CS Practice. So I'm going to open up my Python by saying Python 3 and then Hangman Episodes.py. And then right here we have our not alpha function. So if we are trying to type an alphabet, let's see what would happen if we typed something that was an alphabet. It will show us a good guess with the letter. However, if we typed like a hashtag, it is not an alphabet. Let's see what it says. Alright, it says get guess word is not defined in line 79. So let's go to line 79 and let's update that so it says actually get guess word. So Command S, and then we're going to rerun this function. So if we put in a hashtag, it should say oops, that is not a valid letter. You have 2 warnings left. And then notice how these two are so close together. This is because we didn't add a space in. So if we see right here, we should add a space right here. So when they type it, it is a space and then warnings left. Now, if we rerun this function, it should say you have 2 warnings left. All right, so this now looks identical to what we have over here. And if we guessed a letter that is not in the alphabet, it should update it so it is no longer in the available letters. However, if we wrote something that was not a letter, then it should start subtracting the warnings until there are no warnings left. And then after there aren't any warnings left, let's see what will happen. It starts subtracting from the guesses left. So if we keep on entering things that aren't letters, after it is finished with the warnings, it will start subtracting from the guesses. And this is what we did right here in this function. So now that we have finished this, in the next episode, we're going to start subtracting when they have already guessed a letter. So if it is a repeated guess, what would happen? Alright, that is going to be it for today's video. We talked about user input requirements, and this is the first one. So we talked about what we should do if it was not in the alphabet. And in the next episode, we're going to be talking about what we should do if there is a repeated guess. I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.